Log 007 Universal Time Coordinated received audio excerpt. Then the north span bends at 22 minutes and 17 seconds after the siren. Do not stand under the last lamppost. Repeat, do not stand under the last lamppost. Evacuate east. Evacuate east. Crew A7, shift 3. The voice on the recording is plain. No flourish, no claim. It calls a lamppost last like a clerk checking boxes. Asha heard it over a cheap radio, the kind you leave in the kitchen because it sounds better than the phone. She had been boiling water. The kettle had a thin crack down one side like a white lightning scowl. Kareem liked that kettle. He said the whistling was honest. She shoved her thumb against the crack until the skin went white. It was how she held herself steady. The first prediction was a line read out of an airless ledger, and then, 1 hour later, a rusted bridge 80 kilometers away folded like a paper bridge in a child's hand. A news helicopter showed a lamppost with its last light still flickering. The footage looped until everyone who had watched it knew the angle where the lamppost fell like the punctuation at the end of a sentence. Kareem was on that bridge because the city had declared the morning safe. He called her at 7:14 with a joke about the kettle and said he would bring milk. At 7:35 line noise and then nothing. Afterward, the recordings kept coming. Each one said something small and certain. A gas leak at a bakery, a thunderstorm that would split a power line, a tram door that would not close. Each time the world checked the log like a doctor rereading an ECG. The predictions landed with ugly, mechanical grace. Log 7 to 312 Universal Time Coordinated. Received audio excerpt. We are sending these notes back through phase P routing. Expect inversion artifacts. Do not overfit the calibration. If you must act, limit local interventions to non-branching variables. Operations 2149. The words phase P meant nothing to Asha at first. They sounded like something from a grant proposal. But the repeating sign-off implied authorship. Not gods, not aliens, people who made memos. Asha was not a government scientist. She had an old dish on the roof of a rented house, a crate of salvaged electronics, and a stubborn certainty that frequencies could be read. She had learned to listen to silence. For 3 weeks she kept the radio on, not because she expected miracles, but because the habit of listening soothed a part of her that no longer trusted sleep. When the authorities moved in, white tents, slow-faced men with clipboards, a satellite dish twice the size of a roof. The world divided into camps. The agency called it the vector. Clergy called it a test. Startups saw an API. The phrase signal economy trended within 48 hours. Asha went to the public briefings once. She listened to ministers say, "We will engage transparently." She watched the live stream overlay sell disaster relief bundles. A slide read, "Under the authorities' Unified Response Framework, URF, we remain informed, prepared, and monetizable." She came home and boiled water until the whistle sounded like a funeral bell. Press release, 11 o'clock Universal Time Coordinated. Future Guard FG today announced a Series A extension to scale compassion. Using proprietary correlation from archival signals, FG will deliver precision alerts to municipal partners. CEO Amir Hussain, "We are democratizing foresight. Terms apply. No refunds." An acquaintance sent a link with 3 laughing face emojis and the single word, capitalism. The startup harvested the logs, parsed them with machine learning, and made a product that could be sold to cities. The interface made the future into a dashboard with pleasant gradients and circular icons. The algorithm assigned probabilities to each prediction. 0.82, 0.94, 0.99. The numbers comforted people who needed comfort. One morning, Asha saw a Future Guard feed where probability increased after a club's live stream host encouraged followers to trust the drop. The company's PR account posted, "Engagement correlates with municipal preparedness." The municipal contract followed the money. Influencer caption, 1403 Universal Time Coordinated. Hashtag dead drop candle hash sparkles a probe. Told me which shoes to wear to clear bad vibes. I only wore white and the rain missed me. Swipe up to get my ritual mug plus 20% off. Limited run. They made merchandise. They made religions. A man on cable news read lines about ethical stewardship while an ad for evacuation insurance scrolled at the bottom of the screen. A committee met and called that slide the alignment slide. Attachment A, risk table. Column 3, likelihood. Column 4, brand affinity. Column 5, action, increase PR spend. Asha laughed once, a small dry sound. Then she hung the kettle back on its hook and pretended to believe the world still had some rules. Log 12 to 2341 Universal Time Coordinated. Received audio excerpt. Calibration drifting. Note, attempts to redirect mass zero events increase variance in correlated systems. Limit high-energy interventions. If you cannot prevent a node, strengthen local absorption instead. Ups. The logs began to sound like bureaucrats who had learned to be tender. They spoke of nodes and absorption and variance as if grief could be managed by statistics. The more the world tried to outsmart the voice, the more the voice seemed to suggest careful, smaller fixes. It suggested triage, not miracles. That was the moment people split into two kinds, those who wanted to stop the signal and those who wanted to listen to it forever. The agency argued for control. The startups argued for productization. The cults argued that silence was sacrilege. Asha wanted the recordings to stop because Kareem was gone and because grief made her a poor scientist and an honest one. She went back to the rooftop and tuned the dish until her fingers ached. The first time she tried an intervention, she was careful. The log said a transformer would trip at 8:23 on the north grid. It said the failure would send a surge into the cooling system of a clinic. The clinic, Asha later learned, was in a district where she had once taught basic radio physics to teenagers and where Kareem's nephew worked as a porter. The log suggested local absorption, tie down spare capacitors, reroute the feed. She and two other volunteers followed the instructions and replaced a failing relay. From her rooftop, she watched technicians in the district pat the metal cases and smile like they had wrestled with fate. The transformer tripped. The clinic lights flashed and did not die. The volunteers cheered. For a week, Asha let herself believe in repair. Then the next log spoke. Log 19 to 206 Universal Time Coordinated. Received audio excerpt. Unintended consequence. The redirected load overloaded the substation 2 blocks west. Casualties. 4. Recommendation. When redirecting, coordinate across macro nodes. Localists increase cascade risk. We apologize for omission. Ups. The apology was a human wrinkle, but the iron teeth of consequence chewed still. The substation blew and 4 people died in a building that had held a child's birthday. Asha could feel that blow in her chest. She had fixed a relay. She had read a log. She had been proud. The log's language made the failure feel like an accounting error. That made it worse. The world read that entry and argued. The agency issued a memo in a calm font about governance. The startups posted a blog about iterative scaling. A religious movement declared the voice a test of faith. The votes that mattered were not always the loudest. They were in hallways, in procurement offices, in the quiet of a minister's study where a decision to centralize went down like a swig of bad tea. Asha stopped boiling water for 3 days. She could not watch the kettle whistle without seeing numbers, spreadsheets, a map with colored pins. Committee minutes, excerpt. Che, is there a way to commercialize the logs while retaining public confidence? Director, yes. White label municipal packages, tactical PR, sponsorships. Economic resilience will follow. Note, vote unanimous. Action, draft partnership with FG. Deadline, next quarter. The satire of that document was not sharp. It was slow and banal and therefore worse. The room smelled of cinnamon and expensive hand sanitizer. They discussed public confidence and sponsorships between sips of coffee. Asha imagined a slide titled, Humanity, Now Monetizable. She began to hone a quieter mode of listening. Instead of trying to follow the logs for what to fix, she tried to hear what they could not say. The recordings were wrong in small ways. They used idioms that belonged to languages not yet spoken. They referenced a joke about a band that did not exist. They misnamed a street where Kareem had been walking. Small errors laid into a shape. Someone in the future was reaching back through a system that ate memory. Asha began to suspect not only that the future was sending messages, but that the future was learning while it sent. Each act in the present made the future change its methods. Each attempt to save someone narrowed possible outcomes until fewer were left. It explained the bureaucracy's language, the apology, the suggestion to strengthen local absorption like a bandage on a broken timeline. If so, that meant the future was not omniscient. It was desperate and moral in the worst way, choosing who to save by the arithmetic of branches. Log 32, 402 Universal Time Coordinated. Received audio, excerpt. Note, selective preservation profile. We prioritize long-term viability vectors over immediate demographic clusters. When conflicts arise, triage allocates by projected survival curve. We regret the ethical cost. Ethics Subcommittee 2173. The Voice had a committee now. Ethics Subcommittee. Projected survival curve. The word regret rusted like sound through fog. If the future was cutting timelines to protect some group, it meant it had already chosen winners and losers. It meant Kareem might have been counted as survivable but sacrificed for a larger metric. It meant we were being shepherded like herds while men with soft voices balance equations and use the word we to hide their hands. Asha did not know how to argue with an ethics committee from a century hence. So she argued with what she could touch, the transmissions themselves. Her plan was simple and human. It was not elegant. She would jam the receiving band long enough to let the world breathe. She would make noise around the logs until the whispers were no longer clear. If the future could not calibrate against the present, perhaps it could not narrow the branches. She built a makeshift transmitter from a microwave oven, a coil salvaged from an old TV, and a mismatched power supply. She fed it code that only she could read, fragments of Kareem's favorite songs, the sound of boiling water, a recording of Kareem saying, "Bring milk." The signal was not technical sabotage. It was a lullaby. At 3 o'clock, she climbed the stair to the roof with the kettle and the transmitter in a backpack. The wind was a promise of rain. Log 45, 305 Universal Time Coordinated. Received audio, excerpt. Anomalous noise. Phase P reports increased entropy. Please advise. Ups. Her transmitter threw a thin static across the frequency. For 33 minutes, recordings came in chopped and bent. The voice sounded like it was reading across a torn page. Words slurred. An apology came out as static. People noticed. The startups had dashboards that flickered. A live stream host yelled that the signal was being weaponized. The agency called it sabotage. The cult called it a miracle. The market hiccuped and then adapted. In that 33 minutes, the next predicted disaster did not happen. A small school bus that had been scheduled to cross the bridge that morning was late. No one knew why. The press called it chance. The company called it a bug. The city called it lucky. Asha walked down from the roof with the weight of the kettle in her hands and thought she might have done something good. Then the logs picked up again. Log 47, 402 Universal Time Coordinated. Received audio, excerpt. Correction, interference detected. Local actor attempted temporal masking. Outcome, narrow branch collapse increased by 0.07. Casualties, 12. Note, do not obfuscate source signals without coordinating across macro infrastructure. Ups. The new entry read like a verdict. Her 33 minutes of noise had not stopped the future from acting. It had shifted where the pain fell. More people died. Asha sat on the curb and let the rain take the salt from her face. The kettle on her kitchen shelf sang in the apartment like a mocking throat. She had tried to be human. She had traded small chance for different pain and had been wrong. The future's rules, if they were rules, were cruelly simple. Attempt to change outcomes were allowed, but they would always reduce the space of possible recoveries to a smaller set. You could move the pain, but you could not remove it. The arithmetic of preservation did not care for the lives you loved. The satire of that reality was too sharp. The institutions that had profited from the logs survived. On the day after the masking event, FutureGuard launched a subscription tier, Premium Resilience. The agency published a white paper on coordinated interventions. The committee minutes included a line: local interventions must be governed to avoid cascade. The world wrapped itself in procedures and called that moral work. Asha stopped going to briefings. She stopped reading memos. She began to keep a private log of small things. How Kareem buttered bread too long. How he wore one sock mismatched. How the kettle's crack always caught light at dawn like a thin smile. She had one final choice. She could keep jamming and accept the narrowing consequences. A guerrilla war of small interference until the math closed around them. Or she could find the origin and talk to the men and women who had become committees across a century and beg them to stop. She chose a third way that felt like both courage and capitulation. She would feed the logs one small, unambiguous human truth until the future stopped treating people as data. She climbed to the roof again and rewired the transmitter. This time she sent a single voice loop for hours, Kareem saying, over and over, bring milk. No metadata, no probability, no request to reroute a capacitor. Just the ordinary, useless thing we say to the living. For the first hour there was nothing. Then the log slowed. The voice on the recording started to falter, to stumble, to say things that sounded like listening. There was no physics to explain how a line of bring milk could make a committee hesitate. It did not matter. The loop in the future had to be paused as information. Maybe it could not pause tenderness. The next log arrived weeks later, not hours. It read, Log 98, midnight UTC, received audio, excerpt, observation, an increase in low information noise centered on domestic utterance patterns. Hypothesis, emotion-driven inputs reduce optimization gradient. Action, temporarily cease high-fidelity directives. Further study required. UPS! The ethics subcommittee proposed a pause. The world breathed like a city with a held of breath. The agencies did not make the pause law. The markets did not like it. But something shifted in the calculus. Asha kept sending bring milk. She learned to whistle Kareem's song into the transmitter. The kettle still had its crack. She made a cup of tea and pressed a thumb into the white line until the skin went pale. She did not stop the extinction. She did not end the suffering. What she did was smaller and stranger. She taught a future that was becoming cold to notice a phrase that meant nothing for survival metrics. She taught it that not all inputs could be reduced to triage. On an ordinary morning, she boiled water and let the whistle speak. She closed her eyes, and for a moment the sound was not a warning or a ledger but the echo of a human hand on a kettle. The world kept making committees. The startups kept their dashboards and their premium resilience. Influencers sold ritual mugs. People still died in statistics that no one could totally mend. But sometimes, when the logs arrived and the voice faltered, a broken phrase would come through and Asha would smile the way you smile at a stubborn child who refuses to listen to reason. She never expected gratitude from a committee in 2173. She did not get it. What she got was small and private. At midnight once, a transmission played a voice that said, in a tone she had not heard before, "We will try to make room for noise." It was a modest promise. It was something like admission. Asha put a kettle on the stove and let it sing. The heat changed the crack shape, and for a few minutes the line looked fuller, like a seam mended by heat. She poured a cup of tea and tasted grief the way you taste salt. Sharp, necessary. She kept listening. She kept sending bring milk. The future kept sending logs. The satire kept running. Committees, startups, memos. The world continued to monetize what it could not understand. But somewhere inside that lattice of probabilities, a human phrase had learned to hold space that the arithmetic had no name for. The kettle whistled. Asha folded her hands around the warm mug, as if to warm a memory back to life.